All right, today is January 10, 2018. This is the meeting of the CSI implementation group for Kubernetes. As a reminder, this meeting is public and recorded and published on YouTube. We are going to go through the agenda doc. Let me share my screen. Okay, first item on the agenda is to revisit CSI Dock on Kubernetes.io. Is it okay, or does it need revision for this release? That's a very good point, Vlad. Do you want to talk about it?
No, it's just I was having a conversation with Clint internally, and I think that's one of the points I was supposed to look at. And of course, Lewis did such a good job. But I think part of what he was asking me to check is to make sure that there's enough information inside the Kubernetes IO website itself. And I don't remember any one of us ever checked to make sure that one PR got merged.
The PR got merged.
Yes,
okay.
The PR got merged, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just very, very light on details.
It was just a reference, yeah.
Right. So I think that's why he being Clint had asked me to. It's probably something as CSI getting more and more traction to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's light on detail right now. So I'm not sure what we want to do for beta. If we want to leave it as is, since Lewis's documentation seems to pretty much have everything it needs. How do we want to partition, some of it on the main website and and the rest being on the separate website, on the separate.
So I think the way
site.
that we should partition it is that the Kubernetes.io docs should be very much user-facing, meaning like an end-user consumer of CSI who wants to use this. Assume that the volume plugin is already deployed on your cluster. How do I use it?
Yeah.
And from that perspective, I think the documentation is pretty straightforward. Here's what a PVC looks like. Here's how you create a storage class, and that's it. And then you can have a link pointing out, if you are interested in how to deploy it, point out to the documentation that Luis created on the Kubernetes CSI site.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yep. Then one more item I didn't get a chance to add to the documentation, to the doc is I finally got a chance to go back and start looking at PRs that have been open against CSI. There are at least 2 or 3. So I created a sheet, and I'll put it in the doc when I'm back in front of my computer.
Okay.
A spreadsheet, trying to keep up with whatever issues or PR we have open. Part of what I want to do today is go back and reply, because I think one of them is using the API watcher to instead of polling, which was one of the to-dos in the source code.
Ah, right. Okay.
And yeah, actually, it's interesting because 2 people submitted PRs for that exact to-do.
Huh.
So one of them, last night I was like, hey, it looked like it's a duplicate, so he or she went ahead and closed it, but there's one pending right now that solved that problem. So yeah, exactly. So I'll go back and I started to look at the code last night, but it was late. I'll go back and add whatever comment or whatever. And I think there are a couple other issues. One, obviously, when I was deep in the code, and plus, I think talking to Sergey, he brought up a point of he was running into issues. So I want to make sure that we're tracking those and they don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, the issue that Sergey mentioned, I've added it to a bug section in this doc, and what we'll do is keep a bug section and keep track of them that way.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
All right, excellent.
Okay, so going back to the documentation that Louis, that Vlad brought up, revisit the CSI documentation on Kubernetes.io. Does anybody want to take this as an item to update the Kubernetes IO docs?
I can do that. It's part of the
Sweet.
stuff
Thank
that I've
you,
been doing.
Luis. You are a superhero.
I'm learning from Vlad, so.
All right, cool. Next up, Luis. I owe you an apology because I have not reviewed the end-to-end test yet.
It's okay.
Banging at my door, and I will get to them. I promise.
No big deal.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is the CSI documentation there, the docs. Like I said before, is using that new format, and it's a living document. So please, if you find something that you find a community or anything like that, just send a PR. Second, I will be updating it with some information I got from the community members. They actually is getting quite getting a lot of eyes on it, so that's good. So I will be adding more information to it. As again, it's a living document. It'll keep happening. So one of the things that they mentioned was, why is it the document referring me to another repo with code? That, and I said, yeah, all the YAML information should be in the document. There's no reason why it can't be. And I said, and then we both agreed, so I'll be doing that also. That way, YAML examples of drivers and things like that, and how to set up, everything will be in the document. Second thing is...
Yeah, the only annoying thing about that is that if it ever falls out of sync, it gets really annoying.
Oh, yeah.
We'll just have to be on top of that.
We have to be, yeah, exactly right. Second thing is, I followed through my work at the bottom, and I noticed that it's, I broke it up into 2 different projects because I have a lot of little tiny tasks, and I want to, and one of my tasks actually was to work with others and divide those tasks, right? So instead, what I did was I created these projects so that they would have available tasks, and other team members, especially the person from China or anybody else, can come in and we can see our progress for that one project. So here, for example, I had to put it somewhere. So I use drivers as the place for the project for one of them, and it has some work that we can actually work. For example, Travis report for external attachment, Travis report for this, so we can see who's doing what and how's it going and what percentage of the project is. It's a simple tool, but it does the job, right?
Nice.
And the second one is for the same thing, but CSI Sanity. So I know another person, I think this is the one from the China team member. Well, I'll have a lot of tasks there for work needs to be done, and they can just grab and code, and then we can sync this way. So I think that would be a nice way of doing that. And then also I brought this up, CSI Sanity, at the previous meeting with this, just letting everybody know who was not at that meeting. We had a CSI CNCF meeting. I don't know if it's CNCF meeting or not, but it's a CSI community meeting larger than Kubernetes. And I brought CSI Sanity up. We will be discussing it with the larger community, but I just still want to continue it until we say not to. So
makes sense.
Okay.
Cool. And I'm completely on board with using the projects tool to track basically sub-projects and subtasks.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm going to ask is that I'm going to keep track of things in this doc, just so we have one place, and I'll be poking you guys for updates. But we do that regularly.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a way for me to tell you the truth, for me to know how many breakdowns of those tiny details.
Yeah,
so,
no, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Luis.
Yeah.
Next up, Chakri, CSI volumes, question mark. Expand, sir. Are you there?
He's keeping you in suspense.
So we talked about it, and I just want to know, like, where do we stand? Did we talk to, like, for common drivers like NFS, iSCSI? Did we hear anything from the Kubernetes architecture team saying that where do we put it?
No. So I went to the Kubernetes architecture SIG over the holidays, and I told them, hey, by the way, we're doing this thing, and it's new organizations that we created. The general feedback is don't go around creating new organizations because they don't fall under the CNCF-CLA, and that makes the folks who are part of that organization directly liable for the contents of that organization. In general, make sure that there's a CLA on whatever organization that you create. And so for the Kubernetes-CSI repo that we have, they agreed to put the CNCF-CLA on there and went ahead and did so. So we're good from that perspective. So the next question is about the drivers. Where should they go? Currently, they are tucked into the Kubernetes CSI repo under drivers. What we said was that these should just be examples. I think that's a good place to start. But the question then comes up, where do you put future real production grade drivers? And so Ceph was a good example, and you guys came up with a solid solution for it, which is put it in the Ceph repo.
Yes.
GC, I think we'll have to do something similar for the GC driver. But there are going to be drivers like NFS and iSCSI where they don't have a home. And I think what we may want to do is make this Kubernetes-CSI driver end up being the home for them.
Okay.
I don't see a better solution in the short term.
You could make it Kubernetes-CSI and iSCSI, Kubernetes-CSI, NFS, and those are like the strand, the production ones, and they keep drivers as examples.
As examples, yeah. I
also
that would be okay.
Just because the CLA is applied to this whole group, but just so you know, Brad Childs had created the CSI volumes, and CSI drivers are not dependent on Kubernetes CLA or anything.
That's true. Like if you guys want to go and collaborate there, as long as your legal folks are okay with it, go for it.
No, that's the concern, right? Like then that brings back actually. I see that Andrew is putting a lot of effort for the Go CSI driver too.
Yeah.
So again, we don't want it to be everywhere fragmented out, blah, 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 right? So, and last time we talked about it is we need to see that how can we collaborate together rather than
So there's a set of volume plugins that we absolutely need to collaborate on. Those include iSCSI, NFS, and the like. There are also going to be vendor-specific volume plugins where we need to make sure that they don't end up in wherever this common repo is that we decide on.
Yeah.
As long as that's clear, I'm okay with like having Kubernetes. You know what? Like just the way where it is today, I think it's fine. We can eventually like keep collaborating here, keep improving on these drivers.
Okay.
And then eventually what we can do is promote it from this is just an example to these are production grade, and we have enough testing and CI to verify that we're comfortable with having folks actually use this thing.
I think the contention point is today we have like a CSI common over here. We just kind of implement some common, like a kind of dummy wrappers around it. And Andrew has his Go CSI. And there are some beautiful things in Go CSI too. So I don't want them to be like a totally two different efforts.
Yeah.
And last time we talked about it, we want to maybe pull it out from a common repo. But the only contention point was, what is the common repo?
Because that's a good
problem.
point.
I'm fine with it.
No, go ahead.
So what is the common repo? That's where we stopped last time. So my only point was like, do we want to pick a common repo, or if you don't want to pick a common repo, then want to punt the problem and then eventually revisit it?
Yeah, I wonder if it's time to try to bring up adding drivers to the CSI repo. That said, right now the CSI repo's CLA is currently being worked out. So I would say maybe let's delay that discussion until the CLA for the CSI repo has been completed.
Okay.
And then we can bring up with the CSI group and say there are going to be a set of common drivers that we all want. They're going to be relevant to both Kubernetes and otherwise. And we need a common home for them. The interesting thing is going to be the container storage interface it could host the actual driver itself, but we'll probably still need to host wrappers around it, right? The YAML files that are required to deploy it on Kubernetes.
Yes.
So we need some version of it to live inside Kubernetes-CSI, and then the bulk of it to live inside Container Storage Interface.
Actually, that sounds like a plan then. Okay, we'll keep the deployment files in the Kubernetes CSI, and they will refer to the ones which are Container Storage Interface library or drivers. Okay, sounds good.
So let's say conclusion. Only for volumes that have no clear owner, host in container-storage interface, host Kubernetes specific configs in Kubernetes-CSI. Propose this to CSI community after CSI CLA is finalized. All right, that seems reasonable to me.
And there's already a Kubernetes CSI resources, so you can plop in there.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Next up is going over the bugs that we are currently tracking to make sure we're making progress on them. I think Luis filed this one, which was versioning messaging is incorrect. Should be fairly straightforward to fix.
Yeah.
Is anybody working on it at the moment?
Yeah, me.
Okay.
Yeah. Just so you know, I also have the assignment of fixing versioning.
Okay.
Right. So this goes with it.
Yeah, perfect. Next issue is.
I don't want to say fixing. I want to say enhancing it.
Okay. So next is the volume info issue that Sergey brought up. If somebody could post a link here. Sergey, do you want to talk about it?
Right. So when I try to check the information provided by the not publish volume request, I noticed that volume attributes map is not populated with the information previously taken from the storage class. So basically, it makes very difficult for me to parse that information to get the pool or monitors for the RBD. So I checked, and it seems that one way of doing that was to add that information to the PV in annotations.
Yep.
So that part of the code was missing, and I just added it. So now I can see all the volume attributes are in the PV object. But there is still missing part which will take that annotation and then add it to the not publish volume request. So it would be available within the plugin.
So I thought there was, I think Chakri sent out a PR to do that.
Actually, Brad said he's taking care of it because I was supposed to do it. Then Vlad said, I will take care of this side. And Brad
I was just looking at the original issue and I saw a PR associated with it. I think Vlad took care of it.
Yeah, so Vlad took care of it, and Brad said he's going to take care of it in the provisioner.
So yeah, so it looks like the provisioner and the external attacher fell through, and it looks like Sergey was able to update those. But the internal Kubernetes code, it looks like it was checked in. Let me do a quick.
Yeah, I remember something very.
But it's possible that maybe it's not working quite as intended.
It's possible.
No, that part I think I verified that it works.
Okay, so let's have it in that. Sergey, can we assign this to you to continue to dig in and see if there's any changes that are required on the entry side as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm planning to, if there is no already existing issue, I was planning to basically open a new one.
Perfect. That would be great. And then you can have it linked back to this thread for context.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for
if you stop
covering that. What's that?
Yeah, if you stop, feel free to bring him in the Slack, because once you have the annotations, it should work, because that's how all the drivers, whatever I tested, they work. So
That was I was expecting to see it's working, but by some reason, when I print out the not publish volume request structure, I don't see any volume attributes. So basically, the parameters structure is empty, no map.
no, that's because of the provisioner is not filling it today. That could be the reason. But if the provisioner creates it, the volume with the proper attributes, after that you should not see any issue.
I'll double check. I'll dig deeper. But so far, as I said, I don't see them.
Okay, there might be issues here. So it is a 3-step process. The first is the external provisioner adding the annotation to the PV object. The second is the external attacher taking it and passing it through to the controller publish volume. And then the third is the entry volume plugin, mounter code, reading that annotation and also passing it to node publish. Let's just step through it carefully one by one and make sure that all of these steps are working together correctly.
Yeah, I confirm that step 1 is working because basically I see all my annotations in the actual PV object.
This is after your fix.
Yes, exactly. After the fix I just did. So I'm suspecting the step 3, something is happening during the step 3.
Got it.
So
okay, so you maybe
just a quick
up
note.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was going to add, because that problem sounds familiar. I could have sworn that Chakra was having an issue similar to that, or toward the end, and that's why we made that change.
Yeah, I remember that too, but it looks like we may not have tested it end to end after the change went in.
Okay.
So let's do that. And then Chakri, Vlad, and Sergey, you guys can work together offline to figure out what's going on here. And then once we have this all sorted out and I get around to finishing the end-to-end test review for Luis, we should add an end-to-end test for this to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks again or regress. All right, thank you. Next up is just updates. I'm not going to go through the entire list. I'm going through and cleaning it up to make it more readable. Is there any updates anybody has in terms of what they're working on, anything that you're blocked on?
No update so far.
Okay.
I do want to add that one of the things that I've been working on since last weekend was an environment with multiple clusters to be able to use CSI. And I have one working using CoreOS as the deployment script. So I will be also, hopefully by next Monday's meeting, showing how to set that up. It was quite difficult actually, just to let you know. So it's not a trivial work. So, but it's necessary, I think, as CSI writers and CSI developers, that we have multi-cluster real systems coming up, other than GCE, of course. Right. So.
Makes sense. Cool. All right, then we will reconvene on Friday.
All right, take care, guys.
Take care.
All right, later. Bye-bye.